Good afternoon, fellow Rotarians and guests. Welcome to the Rotary Club of Toledo. Today we'll have another great program with Bernard Swiecki. I'd now like to ask Father Ron Swiecki to come to the podium to deliver a reflection and have Chris Christa lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. And after that, please remain standing and we will say the four-way test together.
Let us bow our heads in prayer. Lord God, Father of all, you fashioned the earth, indeed the whole universe, and set us human beings over all your creation. You gave to us magnificent minds so that we could not only enjoy the gifts of the earth, but also use these gifts to improve the quality of human life. You made us social beings, living with, caring for, working with, and loving one another. Using their gifts of the mind, our ancestors invented first the wheel and then the cart to ease human burdens of travel and commerce. With the industrial age, our ancestors used their minds to invent the automobile, now so central a part of life for every one of us in the developed world. And being social beings, we have developed worldwide systems of commerce centered around the automobile. All this, we hope, for the betterment of humankind. As we consider all that has been done, and as we hear today what is being done, what will be done tomorrow in the automotive industry, may we renew our commitment to work together and to use well the gifts of the earth, the gifts of the universe, for the betterment of human life in our world. To our prayer we say, Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I was looking, if you remain standing, I was looking for George Eistetter, who typically leads us in the four-way test. I don't see George today. So let's just say it together, please. Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? Thank you. You may be seated. As we begin our meeting, I'd like to thank and acknowledge Hartman and Associates, this month's sponsor. And now I'd like to ask greeter Kelly Train to go to the floor mic to introduce our visiting Rotarians.
President Dick, we have two visiting Rotarians today. Visiting Rotarians, please stand as I read your name and remain standing until President Dick welcomes you. We have with us today Joe Coyle from Maumee Rotary, and we have Mr. DeHoff from Upper Arlington. President Dick, these are your visiting Rotarians.
Welcome. Nice to have both of you here. Thank you for coming. Now, if anyone has a guest today who they would like to introduce, if you would please go to the floor mic with your guest.
Come along, Barbara. President Dick, I'm pleased to have Barbara Ickes with me today, a good friend and a Hospice of Northwest Ohio board member.
Barbara, welcome.
President Dick, on behalf of the Vocational Services Committee, I would like to introduce Mike Wogopolsky from St. Francis. He brought with him his group of students for the Interact interviews today.
Great. Thanks, Mike, and welcome to all the students. It's great to have you here today.
President Dick, I'd like to introduce Emma Helvey from Peak Consulting.
Emma, nice to see you.
President Dick and fellow Rotarians, I'd like to introduce Vince Marino from RE/MAX Preferred.
Vince, welcome. Welcome. We did have several Rotarians participate with mock interviews with students from St. Francis today. And if you students from St. Francis would like to stand up, please, you can be recognized. It's great to have you here. Thanks for being here, and thanks for all the involvement with the Interact Club at St. Francis. I would now like to ask Member Engagement Committee Chair Scott Hinshaw to go to the floor mic to give us a wrap-up on March Matchness.
I'm sure by now everyone's brackets are busted, so that's fine. It happens, right? We got to get used to that in life. Thanks to everyone who came out on Friday. We were at the Toledo Club for March Matchness. It was a great event. We had a lot of good fellowship, watched some great games, and ended up raising about $7,300. So with our match, we'll have, So with our kind match from the generous donors, we'll have about 15. However, there is still time to get the benefit of that full $10,000 match that they're willing to do. Between now and March 31st, if you donate, we will still get the match on that money up to the $10,000. So it's really easy. I think you got an email this morning, where if you just click the link, donate now, you can go online, donate to the Toledo Rotary Foundation, and again, the next $2,700 or so will be matched by our donors. So please do that if you have an opportunity. And in case anybody was wondering, the big celebrity bartender winner was Whitney Rothgar. She killed it. It was fantastic. And then in second place was our own President Dick. So, and one last point, I will say that the most interesting match of the day, though, was definitely Hannah and Shireen. Around 6 to 7 o'clock, they went at it vociferously, including in the last 3 minutes of their round, running out into the crowd to get more donations into their tip basket. So good, kudos to them for working so hard. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Scott. Great job. I'm not sure how I finished second. It must have been out of sympathy, because I don't even know how to mix drinks, so they felt sorry for me, obviously. This time I'd like to invite Disability Services Committee Chair Hannah Murad to the podium to just talk a little bit about what the Disability Services Committee is doing.
Thank you, President Dick. Good afternoon, fellow Rotarians. As President Dick had said, I am the chair for the Disability Committee, and currently we have 16 committee members, and we're always looking for new members. Last fiscal year, we were able to award $10,850 for 3 different grants. One of the grants has been awarded for many years, Zoo Day, with Glendale Fieldbach School. This past Zoo Day had a great turnout. Thanks to everyone who came out, including the Interact Club from St. Francis. So thank you guys very much. In the first 2 cycles of this fiscal year, we have awarded $16,500 in grants. $10,000 to Bittersweet Farms and two internal grants, for one for Zoo Day and one for Imagination Station. So that being said, this year we are excited to have 2 events for Glendale Fieldbach School. On April 12th, we are going to the Imagination Station. If you are able to serve, please sign up through the Spoke. Just click on the ad, Service Project, Imagination Station, and it will take you through the whole process. Just remember, one of the best ways to get involved and give back is to be on a committee. If you are not on a committee and interested in being on one but not sure which one you'd like to choose, please join us for our next meeting, which is April 15th at 1 p.m. My most heartfelt thanks goes to my Vice Chair, Rick Marshall, and the entire committee for all their help. Please join us April 15th at 1 o'clock for our next Disability Committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. Great job, and you're doing a great job on the committee. I want to take a few minutes to talk about transformational projects. People have asked, what is a transformational project? And a few years ago, our board and our trustees and the rest of the club came up with a definition of what these are. These are not our conventional grants that we make in the normal process through the year, and as you know, we give away about $200,000 to various 501c3 organizations through the customary grant process. But transformational projects have 4 components. The first component is that they affect a broad sector of the community, whether that be local, regional, or global. The second component is they have the overwhelming support of the Rotary Club of Toledo and have been designated and approved by the club board and foundation trustees. Third, they are likely to be multi-year commitments. And finally, they have a sustainable goal of making a significant long-term positive impact. In coming up with the transformational projects, we went through quite a process. About a year and a half ago, we started to have community conversations. We had 3 conversation opportunities for any member in this club to go to and talk about what they thought was important for this club to address as a possible transformational project. We took the results of that, went to the Strategic Planning Committee. From there, it went to the service committees. The service committees proposed potential projects to the club assembly, which is a group composed of the board, the foundation trustees, and committee chairs and co-chairs. Went back to the board for further review and went back to the committees to we asked the service committees to propose potential transformational projects. Those were submitted back to the board and to the trustees, and we have 4 that have been approved for recommendation to this membership, but nothing will happen unless we receive the approval of you, the members of this club. So there are 4 proposed projects. The first one is universal pre-kindergarten education, promoted by the Youth Services Committee. This project involves the contribution of up to $100,000 of foundation funds to support and implement universal pre-K education in the Toledo area. It involves working and cooperating with local government, businesses, organizations, and individuals to advocate for universal pre-K. And it involves finding additional partners to fund and champion the establishment of universal pre-K in our area. Studies have shown, and I believe we all know, the importance of school readiness for children, and universal pre-K is a high priority in our community. The second proposed project is the promotion of peace and the eradication of violence in the inner city. Our peace subcommittee has already done a great deal of groundwork working with Central City ministers and other peace advocates to start to get this off the ground. This project involves hosting a recognition dinner for up to 100 recognized peacemakers in the Toledo area with major press coverage to honor those who make a difference in the community, to begin the overall dialogue with working with those who are peacemakers in the community, to develop what Rotary wants to have as a 5-star process for organizations in our area to promote peace. We will also hold future best practices development meetings with Peace Strategy Committee members and peacemakers in our community to meet on a regular basis to promote peace in our city. And finally, we wish to formalize the Peace Strategies Committee as a formal committee of Rotary, Toledo Rotary, to continue to foster community peace. The third projected or proposed project is lead abatement. As you know, the City of Toledo has struggled a bit with promoting lead abatement legislation. It's been challenged. It's been knocked down. There are some movements to try to introduce something new, but the community conversations indicated that we didn't want to wait for that to happen. So the lead abatement project is promoting working with local government, businesses, organizations, and individuals to educate the public about lead poisoning and form a coalition to advocate for the remediation and elimination of harmful lead exposure in homes and apartments in Toledo. We want to organize efforts to identify buildings with high levels of lead and those individuals who have been exposed to those high levels, and ultimately coordinate a community effort of paid and volunteer workers and solicit in-kind contributions to remediate lead exposure through encapsulation in the most cost-effective methods. Finally, our fourth project is water advocacy. This is really a continuation of one of our initial transformational projects. We had the 2 conferences on the Great Lakes that we organized, and the District 6600, has continued the effort to promote advocacy for clean water. So this water advocacy continuation will be a continuation of our club's commitment to clean water through committed advocacy within our Rotary clubs and our district. It will be a 3-year commitment of $2,000 per year for assistance with transportation and the development of water advocacy talking points and training to enable Rotarians to influence the Ohio legislature and executive branch to implement legislation and regulations to clean and protect the health of our state's water systems. I think you'll agree that all of these projects meet the transformational project tests. They affect a broad sector of the community, they are likely to be multi-year commitments, and they have a sustainable goal of making a significant long-term positive impact. It is clear that all these projects are ambitious, but each has a strong core constituency within our club dedicated to carrying these projects forward if they are approved. These projects also demonstrate a significant logistical shift from our prior transformational projects. In the past, our transformational projects have primarily involved the contribution of foundation funds with little opportunity for direct involvement from Rotarians. You can see that while these new projects include the contribution of foundation funds, the most significant component of all these projects is the direct involvement required of Toledo Rotarians. Club members will need to give their time and effort to advocacy, organization, and developing partnerships with other key organizations and individuals to achieve success. That's the key thing I found in the club assembly, was that there was a feeling that this club, with all the good people, the connections, and just the power we have to make a difference, that we can start contributing more than funds to get transformational projects done. So now it is up to you, the club members, to decide whether we pursue each of these projects or all of these projects. There is online voting going on at ToledoRotary.org. You just go to How We Help Transformational Projects. It's set up very easily for you to vote online. There will be ballots, hard copy ballots at your tables next Monday to vote, and the deadline for voting is 5 p.m. on April 1st. There should be descriptions of these projects, more detailed descriptions of these projects at your tables today. They will be there next Monday, and they are available online at ToledoRotary.org. Above all, I urge you all to vote and be participants in the decision-making and also in carrying these projects forward. And I thank everybody who's been involved in getting us to this point. At this time, I'd like to invite Rotarian Joe Sharp to introduce today's speaker.
Good afternoon. It is my pleasure to welcome Bernard Swiecki. He is the Director of Automotive Communities Partnership at the Center for Automotive Research, commonly referred to as CAR. Bernard is also the Assistant Director of CAR's Industry, Labor, and Economics Group. His topic today is today's automotive industry, what lies ahead. Bernard manages research projects studying a wide breadth of automotive industry structure and technology topics, and manages CAR's analysis of vehicle market and production data. He has led trade missions to China, Italy, India, and Russia. Bernard has authored numerous articles for print publications, as well as a monthly column on the automotive industry. He is a member of the Society of Automotive Analysts and has served on the U.S. Department of Commerce, Eastern Michigan District Export Council. He received his BA from the University of Michigan and his MS from Eastern Michigan University. Please welcome Bernard.
All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. Apologies if that Michigan reference was offensive to anyone, but generally in the Toledo area, that's pretty safe to be all right. Well, thank you so much for having me here today. I really appreciate it. Thrilled by the huge turnout. This is really good to see. And if you could have my slides, please, we're going to kick things off. I've got a presentation that's meant to be a fairly comprehensive look at what is one of the key issues affecting the automotive industry today, and that is trade and a trade environment. But we also give you a few key other things as well. I do want to say that we at CAR, we are a not-for-profit. And you can see that we're really focused around doing research. A lot of that is published just for free on our website. So if what I'm talking about is of interest to you, you can just go dial it up at no cost at any time. And I also want to make myself available. So if you would like a copy of this presentation, if you have questions or you need data, feel free to just look me up online and reach out directly if you would like. So CAR, again, we do research. We host our own events and conferences, so we'd love to see you at some of those if that's of interest. And then we run programs with both automaker and supplier members, or the program that I run, which is for economic developers throughout the region and honestly throughout the country. So that's us in a nutshell. Let's get right to the good stuff. So first, I wanted to talk about investment. And we have a proprietary database that we call the Book of Deals, and that's where this information is from. And just 2 slides. But we are, by the way, just talking about automakers here. So just the car companies. We're not including suppliers. But in this current era of the automotive industry, essentially the post-recession era, so far, automakers in all of North America combined have invested about $124 billion. The vast majority, about 3/4 of that, has gone into the United States. And I know that there's maybe kind of a stereotype view that Mexico is getting all the money. Which is true in the sense of new automotive assembly plants. 9 out of the last 12 have gone to Mexico, and that is true. However, we've gotten the lion's share of the reinvestment, which is really in the automotive industry where most of the money goes. And so if you look at the total spend, heck, Michigan alone got more than all of Mexico combined. So together, Michigan, Ohio, Indiana are still absolutely the automotive hub on this continent, and to be honest, unrivaled in the world. Also, you'll see Canada struggling, unfortunately, only getting about 7% of the entire continental investment during this time. They are a little bit too expensive. They have other issues. So essentially, they are looking for ways to become more competitive, and we at CAR are actually doing a lot of work with both the Canadian federal government and also parts of the provincial government of Ontario. Now, when we look at automotive investment on a year-by-year basis, you'll see that it fluctuates. And one key fluctuation comes every time we have a negotiation year between the Detroit 3 and the UAW union. And so the automakers now use guarantees of investments as an incentive to get concessions from the union. This is something that really started with the 2007 negotiation, and it's become very much the norm. And so now in 2019, we are in another UAW negotiation year. Hence, by the way, that's one reason why 2018 was fairly low when you look at these numbers, because it's sort of being held as a bargaining chip now in 2019 for that negotiation. One other thought is you'll see in light blue on this chart, that's Mexico. And you've got sort of a decent amount of money going to Mexico through 2015, and then it basically stops. You know, why is that? I can tell you the second half of 2015, that is the last time we had a sizable automotive investment in Mexico, and it's dried up since then. Now, that point in time is key to remember, right? Mid-2015, well before politics got all huffy about NAFTA and Mexico, right? So at that point, you know, we didn't even know who the candidates were going to be. We didn't know what the issues were going to be. What we had is we had the automakers seeing forecasts like the one that I'm going to show you at the end of this presentation that essentially say that this market is about to slow down. And we're about to, kind of take a little bit of a dip. We fell off a cliff in 2009, That was a cliff. It looked like, a straight line down. This is like a little bowl, right? So it's a decline, but essentially the point is you don't need to add capacity for a slightly declining market. And so this is very much a business case dependent decision on slowing down Mexican investment. However, as mentioned earlier, prior to that, they got 9 out of the last 12 assembly plants, so it's not like they have a whole lot to complain about. So let's switch gears now to my main focus, which will be trade. And I'd like to establish, first of all, why trade is so important for the automotive industry, and start with this. This is trade of vehicles. And why do we need access to vehicles that come from the outside? So in 2017, which has kind of been typical lately, we sold about 17.3 million vehicles. And we only built 11 million in the United States. And of that 11 million, we exported almost 2.5 million. So to satisfy our own market, 8.7 million vehicles came from outside the U.S. And I'll show you exactly where from. So between what we export and what we bring in, obviously we need a reliable, established trade environment for all of this to take place. And that's on the vehicle side. Let's look at parts next. But by the way, this is where the vehicles come from. And as you can tell, 56% of the vehicles that we sell in the United States were built in the United States. And the share between how much of that was built by the Detroit 3 and how much by international firms is actually pretty close, right? We're talking 31 versus 25%. And heck, to be honest, we only consider Fiat Chrysler domestic for legacy reasons, right? In effect, in reality, they're also now an international automaker with just Ford and GM as domestic. So, when you look at it that way, actually more of the U.S. production is international companies versus the domestics. But of what comes in from the outside, it's an almost completely even share between Canada, Mexico, and Japan. And then you have everyone else. So you see the importance of NAFTA, obviously Canada, U.S., Mexico, but between Japan, Korea, Germany, we also see the importance of trade with other Asian countries as well as Europe. So switching gears a little bit now to parts and components and away from full, complete vehicles. And on the left of this chart, that's where we give you the totals. And what you'll see is far and away, when we do import parts from outside the U.S., far and away they come from Mexico. We're talking about 46 billion or so. And when you add Canada to that, those two countries alone are more than half of all of our parts and components imports, which is great, by the way, because if it has to come from anywhere, whether it's a vehicle or part and component, if it has to, obviously we'd prefer to make it in the U.S., priority one. But if it has to come from somewhere outside the U.S., we want it coming from Canada and we want it coming from Mexico, because then it still has U.S. content, right? The average vehicle built in Mexico is 30-40% U.S., right? So yes, it's actually much better for us to sell a Mexican-built vehicle than a Chinese or European or Japanese or anywhere else vehicle, because then we don't get our 30%. So, one, we'd like to do it here. If we can't, if we have to give it up for somewhere else, we want it to be Canada or Mexico, because then we still get a chunk. If it leaves the continent, we don't get that chunk. And so a little bit on that table. I know that it's a little bit difficult to read, but it's okay, because the point is this. When you break it down on a category by category basis, most of the time, Canada and Mexico are the leaders in terms of where stuff comes from. But you'll see a whole lot of other names there, and in some cases, the number one source is elsewhere. And a lot of Asian countries and a lot of European countries on that list. And so the point being that one, NAFTA will be the priority, right? The NAFTA region. And then two, it's not enough. We need a reliable, good trade environment with the rest of the world so that one, we can export to it, and two, get imports from it for our own automotive industry. Now, we hear more and more from companies that site a plant in a given location that they want to do that in order to have access to the world market. That if I make something here, whatever it is, I can export all over the world tariff-free, right? It's more and more of a priority as the global economy becomes more integrated. And so for comparison purposes, from the United States, if you put a plant here, you can reach 28% of the world's economy without tariffs, right, because of our free trade agreements. Most of that 28%, unfortunately, is the United States itself, right? We're really talking about maybe 14% of the world's economy, except for the U.S., being reachable from the U.S. without tariffs. From Canada, that number is 53%, and from Mexico, almost an identical 51%. So if you are a company from any country on earth, and if you're looking somewhere to put your plant and exports are a priority, Canada and Mexico have this enormous advantage over us. We're trying to do deals with the European Union. We pulled out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. We may get back into that. We keep hearing rumors that it may be brought back up. But in short, we are short. We are running short in this environment for those companies for whom exports are a priority. All right, moving right along. So NAFTA. NAFTA is now been renegotiated, and it's called the USMCA, U.S.-Canada-Mexico Free Trade Agreement. And so it's been negotiated and agreed upon. It has not been ratified in any of the three countries. So that's the next step, is ratification. In the U.S., we may not see ratification, right? It's not a very popular deal from anyone, regardless of political party. So right now, as you see here, Democrats have taken control of the House of Representatives. And so obviously a lot of Democrats, President Trump is not popular with them. Two, they also tend to be very much union-focused and labor-focused. And for that reason, they have a lot of opposition to the deal. There are also many Republicans who are opposed, either because they feel it's too restrictive, and many Republicans are very much pro-trade, or some of them are the flip side of that. They believe that it's too lax on Mexico, that it should have been harder on Mexico, and therefore they feel they can't support it. So from both parties, we may run into trouble in ratifying NAFTA or USMCA in the United States. Now, it's not just so much that, the deal becomes the deal when it's ratified and signed by the president, and now this is how we trade. Not at all the case. How it actually works is once that deal is in place, Congress then has to look at what the requirements are and so on, and write entirely new laws that say, okay, when we do this, this is how it's going to be. When we do that, this is how it's going to be. And all those laws then have to sort of follow what's in the USMCA. And then they have to pass those laws, the president has to sign them, they become the law of the land, and now USMCA compliance has been reached. The same was true of NAFTA, right? So NAFTA is the deal, and the US and all those laws are actually how it functions. So now to push ratification through, the president may decide to do something fairly aggressive, which is to announce, that's it, we're pulling out of NAFTA. Right? As a way of putting pressure on Congress to ratify the new USMCA. Should that happen, as I mentioned, there's a lot of opposition from both parties to this deal. So, guess what? We can be out of NAFTA. There's no guarantee that Congress will repeal any of all of that legislation that I mentioned that actually makes it function, right? So we may get into an environment where we have pulled out of NAFTA officially, but yet all the laws are written as NAFTA-compliant laws, and Congress won't repeal them. So it's still the law of the land, even though officially the deal is done. And that will lead to one heck of a lot of confusion at the border. And in all honesty, should that happen, it'll be very much a mess to be settled in courts. And not something that'll likely be settled in Washington as it normally would be. So, by the way, we call this scenario zombie NAFTA, right? where it's dead, but yet it's still technically the law of the land because of all this enabling legislation. And it's something very much to avoid, right? Stability in the trade environment is absolutely critical. So a little bit about the USMCA. It is obviously of huge importance to this region because of the automotive concentration that we have here. The USMCA is in some ways more restrictive than NAFTA. It has higher content requirements. However, it made the math to get those requirements easier. And I'll give you just one example. NAFTA requires 62.5% regional content for a vehicle to qualify as compliant. In the USMCA, that number could be as high as 75%, right, which is very, very difficult to meet. However, let's take an engine. Under NAFTA, if that engine, you count up the value and so on, and if it becomes 75% regional content, okay, it qualifies. So then later on, when you do the math for the entire vehicle, you count that 75%. Under the USMCA, different, right? It goes up to 75%. Congrats, you're compliant on the engine. When you take that engine now as part of the math for the entire vehicle combined, you get to count 100% of the value of that engine because that category, you check the box, you're compliant in that category, so you count all of that category towards the final total car math. The U.S. Trade Representative does not like the term roll-up, but that is essentially what it is. It's a roll-up. And so NAFTA was specifically written to prevent roll-ups. USMCA absolutely encourages roll-ups, and that's kind of part of the caveat, is that the content is higher. However, the math makes it easier to meet that content. So on the compliance issue, we believe U.S. and Canadian-built vehicles will mostly comply, mostly as they are, very little change. However, the issue becomes in Mexico. So we believe, so we've gone vehicle by vehicle, trying to calculate the content of each one and so on. We believe there are 47 vehicles that we're bringing in from Mexico that are going to have trouble with compliance. Should that happen, and you're an automaker who makes one of those vehicles, you're really dealing with three options that you can turn to. One, add content to make them comply. And in automotive, this is very difficult and expensive, and it takes time. So this is an option that an automaker will turn to if that vehicle happens to be particularly high volume, high profit, high importance to the company. You can also, by the way, pay the 2.5% tariff. Okay, and this is a key point. All this hubbub, whether you're talking about USMCA, NAFTA, and so on, what do you actually get for compliance? What you get is the fact that you can bring that vehicle or that part in paying zero tariff. But if you're non-compliant, you're only paying the MFN, most favored nation, 2.5% tariff. So this is where countries have to be very careful in how they structure these trade deals, because you may think, well, heck, I'm going to make it as favorable towards me as possible and try and screw the other countries over to favor my own more expensive production. But if you are successful in getting that, and what you did will make the average vehicle 2.6% more expensive, no problem. The company says, heck, rather than meet that, I'll just pay the 2.5%, right? So it's very easy to shoot yourself in the foot by overreaching on the strictness of some of these requirements. So that's the other option that companies have, is if the cost of compliance is too high, just pay the 2.5%. On some cars, you'll never get away with doing that because the profit margin won't let you do it. On higher profit margin vehicles, it may be cheaper than trying to make the thing comply. And by the way, on vehicles that are low enough volume, low enough profit margin, your final option is to simply stop bringing that vehicle over from Mexico. And for those, by the way, for many of the vehicles built in Mexico, they don't come here in huge volumes. We may see them just quite simply disappear, and we already know of a few where that will be the case. All right, so moving along. So I've got these options. Can get off the Zoom and go to the next slide, please. All right, so for those times when an automaker chooses to go ahead and pay that 2.5%, on average, that'll add about $635 to the cost of each individual vehicle that you're bringing over. And if you look at how many vehicles there are that you might have to do this for and how many units we bring over, in total, this might be about an $800 million additional cost across all those vehicles. But the really important number is for each one individually, about $635. Now, another measure that we're considering right now is what we call Section 232 tariffs. Now, right now, we already have Section 232 tariffs on aluminum and steel. And 232 is it's a part of the trade code that allows the president to put special tariffs in place on very specific items when the United States deems that there's a national security risk to imports of that good. By the way, there is no definition, okay, what counts as a national security risk. Basically, if you determine that there is one, good enough. You can go ahead and do this, right? So this has only ever really been used one other time, as far as I know, before the Trump administration, and it's kind of an iffy, sort of ill-defined piece of legal language. So we have right now 232 tariffs on steel and aluminum. Those have been great for the steel industry, not so great for every other industry that uses steel. On average, for every job in steel production, there are 50 to 60 jobs that use steel or aluminum in the product, right? So right now what we hear from the car companies is the U.S. has the most expensive steel and aluminum in the world. And so it's great, again, for the steel producers, not so great for the companies that use it. Ford and GM each have come out and said, and by the way, this doesn't even count 2019, through the end of last year, that these tariffs have already cost each of them more than $1 billion extra dollars of cost just because of these tariffs being in place. And so it's already in place, Section 232 on steel and aluminum. And just for proportion of potential impact, we want to show you what that means, right? So that's $46 billion of imports that this impacts. Now, we are considering Section 232 tariffs on vehicles and parts. And holy cow, that is a whole new thing, right? Just for comparison purposes, should that happen, it's affecting $335 billion with a B dollars worth of imports, right? So a huge issue in the automotive industry. The industry knows that this is being considered because it's very public. So May 23rd, last year, the president ordered U.S. Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross to begin a 232 investigation into vehicles and parts. They have 270 days to do that, so I believe February 19th, that report was delivered to the president. That report contains conclusions and recommendations. Now, the president is not bound by those recommendations. He has the freedom to do whatever he really likes. And so right now, essentially, no one knows, what's in that report, what the recommendations are. And frankly, even if we did know, we don't know what the president would do with those recommendations. So they're just sort of sitting there right now. 90 days they can sit without action being taken. Also at this time, as I mentioned earlier, we are in trade negotiations for comprehensive trade deals with Japan, with the European Union, and with Britain, all countries with whom we do a lot of automotive trade. And so, if we cannot get good terms from these countries on those issues, we have this hanging over their heads, right? These potentially really damaging 232 tariffs that are sitting on the president's desk that he can say, hey, this negotiation isn't going in a way that I think is favorable to the U.S. If you don't give us a concession on this or on that, I'm going to put these puppies into place, right? So it's a very interesting environment now with one trade action potentially influencing another and huge consequences in play, as I showed earlier. By the way, the number most often bantied around in terms of what a 232 tariff would be on vehicles and on parts is 25%. And we've done the math on this. We believe that would add $3,000 to $4,000 to the cost of each vehicle sold in the U.S., and in total, it would hit our market to the tune of 1.4 million lost sales. So huge, huge potential negative impact on the automotive industry should this happen. And the automotive industry, by the way, is united against this. The domestic lobbyists in Washington, the international, the parts companies, the tire companies, heck, the dealer association has come out against the 232 on parts and autos. So it's rare, by the way. The automotive industry is often very divided, and you'll have the domestics having a very different opinion, than from the internationals, or the car companies see it one way and the suppliers see it in a different way. This is one of those rare cases when literally everybody is united, against doing it this way. All right. So switching to my final subject, forecasts and what we see coming ahead. First of all, sales, which is to me the driver of everything because it's based on what's selling and what's not, that every other decision, including production, is based on. So this is our own forecast from CAR, the latest that we've got. So what you'll see is in 2016, we set an all-time record. And by the way, prior to things taking a slight dip in 2017, we had increased sales every year from 2009, the longest growth streak in the history of the automotive industry in the U.S. And obviously that's over now because we've had a few down years, so we can't call it growth anymore. But until that point, 2017, that was the longest since World War II growth streak that we had experienced. So we're coming down off that all-time peak, but not that far down, right? Keep in mind in 2008 and 9, that was an enormous loss. Half the market went away. Now, from peak to trough, we're talking about losing about 1 million units of sales, which is really 4 or 5 assembly plants spread across the entire market, the entire industry. It's really not that big of a loss. One other thing I like to say when I speak is more so than ever now, it's not just a question of how much are we selling. It's also very important to follow what are we selling. And I'm sure it's no surprise to everyone here, sedan sales are massively on the decline, and we're selling more utilities, whether they be true SUVs, CUVs, which are cars posing as SUVs, right? So I drove one here. I drove an Acura RDX here. But if you have everything, including things like a Jeep Grand Cherokee, that ain't no truck. It's not really officially an SUV, right? It's a CUV. It's a car. There's no frame there, right? By the way, I love this. When I got the title for the car that I just bought from the State of Michigan Secretary of State, it actually admits what the heck this thing is, honestly, because it says 2019 Acura RDX station wagon, right? That's what these things are. So if you got yourself a Ford Explorer, a Jeep Grand Cherokee, Ford Escape, and all that stuff, we even use the word SUV in marketing them. Technically, nah. They are cars that look trucky because we made them taller, we gave them all-wheel drive, and so on. But they are our latter-day station wagon, and they are where the entire market is going. And that is good news because we make way more money on them than we do on passenger cars, right? And so if you are going to have a recession, if you are going to have a dip in vehicle sales, my God, this is how you want to do it, right? Where the dip is only 1 million units peak to trough, and people magically start buying the stuff where we make money. Woohoo, compared to 2008, this is fabulous, right? It's a downturn, but it's the most humane downturn you can possibly imagine. So that's sales, but of course we also need to look at production, and I will show it to you 2 ways. And by the way, I should stop finishing these presentations this way because it's a bit of a downer at the end. But production looks like this. You've got 2016, no surprise, as the peak, and then we fall off a little bit, right? And just as is the case with sales, we start picking up, and we basically recover most of what we lost but we never come back to peak, not in the U.S., right? All the way through 2025, we do not come back to peak. And look at how different that looks when we look at North America in total. Once again, all-time peak in 2016, no surprise. It falls off, and then come 2024, 25, it comes back to peak and over. It sets new records at the continental level. Hence the consequence of losing 9 out of the last 12 assembly plants to Mexico, right? At full tilt, at full volume, the shift in production is enough that you notice it there. And I think, to me, this really makes the case for why we need to fight like heck for every single assembly plant, which we already do. But it's really time, I think, to ratchet that up because we're not going to get any new ones for a little while, not with a down market. And you can see what it does to the total production volumes. It's, to me, very interesting that the continental number is shifted based on what we lost to Mexico in terms of that plant location, which, by the way, overwhelmingly, I didn't believe them when they started saying this. It's not cheap labor in Mexico. It's that open trade environment. We can reach more than half the world without tariffs. So just as one example, if Audi put their plant in the U.S., not in Mexico, for every Audi that they import back to Europe, they would pay about $5,000 of tariffs. For every Audi leaving Mexico to Europe, they pay 0 tariffs, right? So again, sometimes we talk about the trade environment being too free, but in the case of these plant locations, the more free, the better, right? Because, yeah, absolutely. If you are saving $5,000 in tariffs, one country versus another, there's nothing an economic developer can offer Audi to say, hey, bring that plant to Ohio. I can give you what? What exactly is going to count? $5,000 a unit of savings, right? So for those plants where trade is a priority, we have a real competitiveness problem because of the lack of free trade agreements in the United States, and I'd love to see more of those coming in the next few years to remedy that situation. So that's the end of my prepared remarks. I'm going to be happy to take some questions right now. I'd also like to reiterate that CAR is a not-for-profit. We're happy to have you reach out to us. We're easy to find online. Feel free to shoot me an email or give me a call, and we'll be happy to help out. So with that, thank you very much, everyone. Okay, I think we've got someone. Bless your heart, sir. Thank you.
You're welcome. Recognizing what you said with the SUVs, the CUVs, and so on, and the fact that I think most of those, the manufacturers are trying to load them up a bit, hence the profitability. So does that relegate the first-time car buyer who might be coming out of college or something to the used market? Because to me, it's like somebody coming out of college is not necessarily going to be able to afford the $35,000 or $40,000 SUV that's fully equipped with every gizmo and gadget.
So the answer is yes, absolutely. Now, of course, we still have entry-level vehicles that are sedans, entry-level vehicles that are utility vehicles. However, keep in mind that on average, right now, average transaction value is about $35,000 per unit. And given that the average household income is in the mid-50s, that's a stretch. So yes, we are seeing more folks of lower income have their first few vehicles be used. And one unfortunate outcome of that is we've seen used vehicle prices spike pretty rapidly as a result of that, right? Because it's a supply and demand thing. So it's becoming an issue. The average household buying a new car now makes about $90,000. Not the, so well above average. In a way, new vehicles are becoming a luxury good. Yes, sir.
First of all, thank you very much for coming. It's a very interesting presentation.
Oh, thank you. My pleasure.
What's the story on the Lordstown closure, and do you see a place for that plant in the future?
So on Lordstown, and boy, we could spend this entire lunch talking about that. But in short, it is this. General Motors had about 1 million units of unused sedan capacity that it already owned but wasn't using, right? Hence, no single automaker can carry that kind of an unused capacity because it costs money to maintain it that you're not getting back in terms of sold vehicles and profits. So hence, literally all of the cuts that GM is making are to sedan plants, right? Every assembly plant that they're closing is a sedan plant. And that's what happens when you have one company with 1 million unused units of capacity in a one segment that happens to be declining the most. That being said, Lordstown's fate is by no means sealed. As I mentioned, 2019 is a UAW negotiation year. So that may yet change. Frankly, even if it doesn't change this negotiation, it can still change. The best example would be the Spring Hill, Tennessee plant, also a GM plant, where that plant went on what we call warm idle. It was on a closed list. It went to warm idle. It sat unused for years, and then GM brought it back, and now it's making utilities, right? So it doesn't necessarily have to be even worked out this year. Sometimes these things last until the next negotiation with the union. So with that, I think we're just about out of time. So thanks again very much, everyone.
Thanks, Mike. Bernard, thank you for the great presentation. To show our appreciation, the Toledo Rotary Club Foundation will make a donation in your honor to the Rotary International Polio Plus Fund. And we also have this book about Toledo history for you as a gift.
Well, thank you.
So thanks again. Great presentation. Please join us next week when our speaker will be Chris Peterson, speaking on the 20 Under 40 program. Immediately following today's program, the Black Tie Affair Auction Committee will be meeting in the North Cape Room, and the past presidents will be meeting in the Waynesfield Room, which is right around the corner next to the buffet line. Chuck Mann is on vacation this week, but I'm going to try to channel Chuck briefly. Since we're all in the middle of March Madness, a few basketball quotes. Pat Williams, Orlando Magic general manager, on his team's 7-27 record in 1992, said, "We can't win at home, we can't win on the road. As general manager, I just can't figure out where else to play." Weldon Drew, New Mexico State coach, once said, "We have a great bunch of outside shooters. Unfortunately, all our games are played indoors." And my favorite from Shelby Metcalf, basketball coach at Texas A&M, on reviewing a player's semester grades of 4 Fs and a D, he said, "Son, it looks to me like you're spending too much time on one subject." With that, I hope you will be servants out there and be the inspiration. We are adjourned.